1 second. Councilmember Richards?
Here.
Councilmember Weingart?
Here?
Councilmember Hughes?
Here.
Vice Mayor Derwin?
Here.
Didn't hear Mayor Alfs.
Mayor Alfs.
Here.
Wasn't loud enough, sorry.
Okay. Thank you. All right. We will move on to oral communications. If anyone wishes to address the council on an item not on tonight's agenda, you may do so now. Rita has her hand up. Go ahead, Rita.
Hi there. After picking up about 30 cigarette butts and all kinds of garbage along my property on Westridge last week, I've checked with Howard, and I guess there isn't an ordinance or a rule that prohibits smoking, but I'd like to ask for us to look into one and have one for smoking on adjacent or any construction sites, and the ability for construction vehicles to not be allowed to come up Westridge before 7 a.m. They've been coming up about 5:30 in the morning, big trucks that are changing gears up the hill. And Howard said that they cannot park at Ford Field, but something, if it can be done, please, it should be done, especially about the smoking, because I don't have to worry about other things burning down my house. With about 30 cigarette butts that I picked up, any one of those in the grass, in the dry grass that I picked up, could have started a fire. Thank you.
Okay, Jeremy, do you want to respond to that? You're muted.
Sorry, through the mayor, Rita, if you do get some information about those trucks, and I'm not asking you to go out at 5:30 in the morning to take pictures, but if you have any information about specifically the license plate or company, we are happy to contact them and let them know both the spirit and letter of our rules around work before 8 a.m. So please.
Yeah, Howard suggested that perhaps they'd have to do a sting or something and have, a vehicle out there to see who comes up. But from my house, I'm not going to stand out there with the mountain lion at 5:30 in the morning to throw rocks and try and get their license plate number. But if something the town can do, I'm sure I'm not the only one affected by this. And
Okay.
the smoking is really important issue. Please, if that message can get out to the contractors. And over a period of time, the first contractors are not the same contractors 2 years later working still on a project. So please, if that message can get out.
Okay, agreed. Thank you. Okay, Carolinevertongen has her hand up. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Muted? Okay, great. Thank you. I will not be able to attend this meeting via Zoom via my computer, and I need to address the issue. When we use our phone, we are put on mute and we cannot speak up. So that's an issue that we should look into. So I will be very quick. Again, my written communications in town council and to the planning commission on October 7th were not included in any of the previous and the current town council meeting. I have questions regarding to our local elections, which I tried to ask during the meeting with all the candidates, but my questions were not asked. So I know that Portola Valley spends about $10,000 when we have elections, and I would like to know what is done with this money, and can candidates use that money to promote themselves. I've only received the mailer of Mayor Alves and Sarah, and I'm not sure if the two other candidates had access to the same resources and actually access to our mailing information. The third action that I wanted to address is in regards to the resolution that was agreed upon last week or last town council meeting, the flashing beacons. We have had several meetings about that issue, and I would like to refer to the last meetings and minutes, February of this year and in March. Both the Architectural and Site Commission and the Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Committee, they did not approve the flashing beacons. So I would like to understand why we bring up that issue again. On the February 10th, the commission said that the commission concurred that the rapid flashing beacons do not fit in Putola Valley, although may be considered later if deemed necessary or required. I have not seen any report where that is now required or deemed necessary. I will be listening to the summary of Mr. Dennis in regards to the equity and race roundtable meeting with District Attorney Wagstaff and the Sheriff's Office. Again, I will not be able to ask questions, and we were not able to ask questions directly at the roundtable meeting. There is no roundtable meeting if not all stakeholders can talk. So it's very disappointing. And lastly, on the topic of sustainability, the way I understand sustainability is avoidance of the depletion of natural resources, and in order to maintain an ecological balance. Well, there is no ecological balance if we're only going to allow just one resource. Electricity is not the only resource we should consider. And I hope we will continue to have serious meetings about this and talk to all stakeholders, not only to review all the resources we have, their benefits, the cost, but also the health concerns that are associated with smart meters and alternative resources like solar panels. Thank you so much. And I will be listening to your meeting, but unfortunately, the way it is now, when I will switch over to my phone, I will not be able to give comments, sadly.
Carolyn, on your phone, if you hit *9, that raises your hand, and *6 unmutes you. I do it all the time when I call in on Zoom meetings. So just FYI.
So *9 is?
*9 raises your hand.
Okay, great.
And *6 unmutes you if you need to unmute.
Thank you. Perhaps we can add that to the instructions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, Kristi's got her hand up next. Go ahead, Kristi.
Hold on just a second, Kristi. All right, there you go. You need to unmute at your end.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I don't know if this is the time to take number 3 off of the consent agenda or move it. I came in late, sorry.
You can request, we can take 3 off of consent.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other public comments, then we'll move on to the consent agenda. So we'll pull 3. So we don't want to pull anything else from the consent agenda. Anne, go ahead.
Yes, Jeff, item 1.
Yes, okay. Okay, yeah, I was thinking we might pull minutes anyway. Okay, so we've pulled 1 and 3, which means that, so let's just go through them one at a time since we're going to be doing that anyway. We'll start with minutes. Anne, go ahead.
Okay, on red page 14, and sorry, it's going to take me a second to get there myself. There's just one, there was a missing word in comments that were made. Down near the bottom, under Councilmember Wenger, about 2/3 of the way down. And I'm at 6 lines up from the bottom, make the changes that, oh, excuse me, the one prior to that, few procedures have not been, insert the word been subjected to. If you can see where that is. They omitted the word been. And that's the only one change I had.
Okay. The comment I was going to make on the minutes was that at our last meeting, we clearly had some form of some form of disruption of the meeting. And we were having a discussion just briefly, myself, Jeremy, and Cara, about what, if anything, to sort of notate in the minutes, just to clarify that someone's coming in and making these comments that's not actually really, sort of, it's not a real person. I don't think we've come to any resolution on that yet. I think we're going to leave these minutes as they are, with the thought that going forward, we will think of a way, some possible just acknowledgement that certain commenters are not sort of, are clearly bots or someone else trying to disrupt a meeting as opposed to, legitimate participants in the process. I just wanted to acknowledge that. Cara or Jeremy, did you want to add anything to that?
Nothing to add in my end.
Okay, so with Anne's amendment, I will entertain a motion to approve the amended minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Anne, seconded by Craig. Sharon, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Weingart,
Aye.
Councilmember Richards,
Aye.
Councilmember Hughes,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Derwin,
Aye.
Mayor Alves.
Aye. Okay, then we'll move on to item 2, the warrant list. I will entertain a motion to approve the warrant list.
Move approval.
And a second.
Second.
Okay, moved by Craig, seconded by John. Sharon, roll call vote. Sorry, any discussion? Okay, Sharon, roll call vote, please.
Nope, we can't hear you,
We
Sharon.
can't hear you still,
You're not muted, but we can't hear you.
but I know who you called, so I'll say aye.
I'll point to you.
Okay. Aye.
Councilmember Richards,
Aye.
yay. Councilmember Hughes,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Derwin,
Aye.
Mayor Alves.
Aye. Okay, item 2 passes. Item 3 is the report on short-term rentals. Rita, did you have your hand up for item 2 or item 3?
I just want to make a comment about the bot voice from item 1.
Okay.
There are people in our community that may have Parkinson's or ALS and cannot speak without these type of materials. And so I would like some consideration in case we do get a bot voice before it is then seriously questioned, to let the person have the benefit of the doubt in case it is a person in our community that has to use those devices.
Absolutely, and everyone is called on. We just, it's not that the voice is automated, it was the content of it. It was clearly someone who was not trying to contribute to the meeting. So, point taken, thank you. Okay, item 3 is a report on short-term rentals. Jeremy, do you want to just give a quick summary on this one?
Sure. The council last year received what was really a study session initially and a report on the number of active ADU rentals or house rentals in town, short-term rentals. The council asked for an annual report, and this staff report aims to fulfill that request. Per the discussion, we've seen a slight decrease in the number of units. The data that we receive still does require some level of parsing because it's an amalgamation from other communities in the 94028 area code, so Ladera and Los Trancos Woods, where there are also active short-term rentals. I have no other further comments. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions from the council on item 3? Okay, I see a hand up. Kristi Corley, go ahead.
Mute. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm wondering if we're considering all eight rentals. Seems mighty low. And I'm wondering if we're looking at all areas to get this number correct. Meaning all avenues to know how many rentals we have in Portola Valley.
Through the chair, the information is correct. It's amalgamation of different online resources, VRBO, Airbnb, and others. So there are actually a few companies that do pull this data together, and we pay for that information on a monthly basis. So the information is correct. There may be other ways that people are choosing to advertise short-term rentals, but this is capturing through the most typical used sites.
Have we ever considered doing a survey to find out? And this includes ADUs and houses, is that correct?
Correct.
Wow. That seems low. I'm just gonna say that maybe we should do a better study on that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Rusty, go ahead.
Hold on, Rusty. There you go.
Thank you. Maybe just a couple of questions about it. So when we say short-term rental, what are we measuring? Are we measuring ADUs that have been let out on a month-to-month basis or
Less than 30 days.
less than 30 days? So that's all we're measuring. We're not measuring the other properties that have been leased out in town.
No.
Do we do that by other means? Do we have another data source that informs us what other properties are available for rent on a longer term basis and have been rented on a longer term basis?
No, I don't believe we do.
Through the chair, I'm unaware of a system that has that. I'm happy to look into it, but I'm not aware of a company that amalgamates long-term rental data, 6 months a year.
So this is basically, I don't mean to keep asking questions, but I'm just trying to understand what this is. This is basically a look at a short-term rental market where people are renting space out on a vacation or short-term basis for business or similar uses. That's it?
Craig, did you?
Correct.
Rusty, this came about last year or the year before. The council had some questions and some people had asked in public comment about how often people were using sites like Airbnb to lease out properties in Portola Valley. And there was concern that there was potentially a lot of that kind of short-term rental commercial activity going on in town, and the traffic and turnover of residents and having people in houses who people weren't sure if they belonged there and that sort of thing. So that's where this came about. It wasn't about long-term rentals. It was really about whether we wanted to introduce some kind of regulation or tax or otherwise attempt to control these short-term rentals. And the upshot last year was that there weren't really a significant number of the properties. And so we didn't do anything at the time, but we asked staff to give us a report on a regular basis to see if that changed. With COVID, it's clearly gone down dramatically, and still looks like it's not particularly a problem in our town.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. If there are no other comments, I'll entertain a motion to approve item 3.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, moved by Mary Ann, seconded by John. Sharon, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Weingart. Councilmember Weingart. Richards. Councilmember
Saying aye.
Richards. Councilmember Hughes.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Derwin.
Aye.
Mayor Alves.
Aye. Okay, motion passes. Thank you. That brings us to item 4, the update on the from the Ad Hoc Wildfire Preparedness Committee. Jeremy, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Alves, members of the council. This is the quarterly report that the chair of the ad hoc committee recommended to the council. So this is part of that series. As you can see, starting on red page 24, we've color coded the short-term and medium-term recommendations per their implementation. As you can see, many have been completed, many are underway. There are a few that have not begun. I did want to point out a few, as I've done in the past. Item 1, goodness, I lost it here. Where'd it go? There's an item on here regarding breakaway locks for the gates. So we're looking into whether or not we can actually implement that in a way that makes sense. The breakaway lock mechanisms that Howard and the fire marshal have identified can be tampered with in some ways. And we've had some issues with our gates in the past. So we're looking for alternative ways to meet the spirit of the recommendation right now. Item 1O on red page 25, that, as I've mentioned in the past to the council, that effort's well underway using a consulting building official. And it's our hope to bring to council in the December meeting the recommendations here. This would be done in conjunction with item 2I. We've actually asked the building official to write the recommendations a little stronger than were recommended by the committee, that goes beyond encouraging for existing homes. Unfortunately, because I'm on vacation, I did miss a meeting today that I know that staff had regarding some elements of this process that are ongoing, just related to the mechanism by which we could bring these forward. But that effort's underway. So we're excited about that. It's a pretty substantial effort. The one other thing I would say under this item is that we're expecting at the next council meeting on November 11th, the council to preview or review the initial second set of recommendations in an initial way from the wildfire prep committee to get some further direction. They were presented at the wildfire committee a couple 3 weeks ago. And it was determined by the committee that it made some sense for the council to opine at that point to see if these are in the right universe, and how to allocate some resources moving forward. Of those 6 recommendations, it appears that 3 of them are actually something that would better fit into fire code. I'm not prepared to speak into any level of detail tonight. That'll happen on November 11th. So I hope that this fulfills the ongoing desire of the council to see how we're doing. I think we're doing very well. And I think in particular, some of the medium-term recommendations, we are moving along. So I think that that's great. Happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Okay, questions from the council on the report? Mary Ann, go ahead.
Mine is not, my voice is not all there. I have a chest cold, but it's not COVID. Anyway, I think it was number 1. I think it was short-term C, publish a list of highly flammable plants. I think when they do that, they should also look into maintenance practices, because what I've discovered on my property is the native plants that were low growing and were not irrigated during the summer and that caught a lot of debris like leaves, those were all pulled out when the guys came in to do the vegetation management. My natives that had been watered and that were pruned so you could see through them, those stayed. So I think we need to start thinking about that too. Thank you.
Jeremy, can you remind me, we've got now a list of 5 trees that we're considering not allowing to be planted. Can you remind me of the details of that? There's
one of the 6 recommendations that came from the wildfire committee that this body has not seen yet is actually banning further planting of certain highly flammable trees, and also reminding people that there's a couple invasive species that also coyote brush, for instance, that are highly susceptible to fire. So that will be one of the recommendations that the council will opine on.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, that's came up the other night at the Conservation Committee meeting. And they are in the process of looking at or putting together a fire-resistant plant list in cooperation with the fire department. And we'll be having a special meeting on that in a couple of weeks. So we'll know more of what's available at that point.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, I see one hand up from Felicity Barringer. Felicity, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. On item of the continuous operations under the wildfire issues, vegetation management, J, prioritize vegetation management. I realize that's ongoing, but I've recently sort of looked more closely as I drive down, particularly Portola Road, and there's a lot of overhanging trees. You can just imagine, of course, we all have our doomsday scenarios, but you can imagine a problem where branches or trees actually fell in the roadway during an emergency evacuation. First, as for the Portola Valley section of the road, I assume that's something that's being worked on, and Jeremy or Howard could confirm that. But I'm also concerned about the trees on the Woodside part of Portola Road, which I think are much worse and more dangerous than those on Portola Valley. I'm no expert, but it is concerning when you drive down Portola Road. What's happening with that, with Woodside particularly?
Jeremy, do you want to speak to that one?
Sure. Through the chair, Felicity, thanks for the question. The initial efforts that the town has focused on in the last year has been related to the ladder fuels alongside the roads. It's been limited on trees. That's the next part of our work, identifying trees that just their presence is an issue, but also looking at overhangs in certain parts of town as well. So that's going to be part of this ongoing effort. So Howard and the fire marshal are looking at this, but we concentrate our efforts initially on the ladder fuel and shaded fuel breaks alongside the road. But that's the next step.
And what about Woodside itself? Do we have arrangements with Woodside? Because if their trees fall down, it's us who gets blocked.
That is a very good question. We've had some just staff to staff conversations, and I have to follow up with them on next steps, but there's nothing in, we have no agreement, if you will, on that.
Thank you.
Craig, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I think one thing on Portola Road as you head, well, starting in Portola Valley and then as you head into Woodside, PG&E very helpfully chopped off half the trees on the away from the road side of most of the trees along that stretch of road to stop the branches from being near their power lines. And so those trees, in a lot of cases, now have a lot of weight hanging out over the road. So if they were to fall down in a fire or an earthquake or wherever else, they're going to fall towards the road, not away from the road, thanks to PG&E. So that Jeremy, as you're discussing with Kevin and Woodside, might be something to bring up as well.
Yeah, and I'd say through the chair too, that this isn't an issue that specifically came up at the committee. So it might be something that we want to bounce back to them about how we want to approach some of this beyond, conversation at the staff level. It certainly has more weight if we do through the committee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felicity. Rusty's got his hand up. Go ahead, Rusty.
Hold on, Rusty. There you go.
Thank you, Jeremy. I understand there'll be a hearing on November 11th, so regarding the substance of the proposal. So I don't want to go into too much detail here, but I do want to raise 2 points that I would urge the council to consider and incorporate in the November 11 hearing. One of them is that 12 years ago, the town hired Moritz Arboricultural to do exactly this analysis of vegetation in town. And they did a very extensive analysis, wrote a 30-page report, published a extensive map showing the distribution of hazardous vegetation, identifying what type of vegetation is the most combustible and hazardous in town, where it is, what needs to be done about it, what needs to be done on the roads. It seems to me that we ought to be giving that much more attention and publicity, and particularly the wildfire committee should be fully informed of that report and using it and incorporating it. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. The second comment I have is during the October 20th meeting of the wildfire committee, at the end of the meeting when status reports were given by the various subcommittees, I listened to the chairman of the evacuation subcommittee, Dale Fow, indicate that while they made some progress going forward on emergency preparedness and evacuation, the one thing he could confirm was that he had learned or had been told that it would take 5 to 6 hours, at least 5 to 6 hours to evacuate town, given the limited evacuation routes in town. That dropped like a bombshell. And the reason I raise that is because recent experience in the CZU fire, which expanded from 8 to 45,000 acres in 10 hours, and the glass fire, which expanded from 10 to 40,000 acres in 12 hours, teaches us that we don't have 5 to 6 hours to evacuate this town. This town, the entire town is 7,000 acres. If a fire ignition occurs in this town in red flag conditions, in wildfire conditions, evacuation is going to be very difficult. And I would simply remind the council that this general plan safety element written in 2010 calls upon the town to organize and conduct periodic town-wide emergency evacuation drills of the entire town. And if we don't do this at scale, this is not a neighborhood by neighborhood problem. This is a problem of the entire town. And until we recognize that we have to practice and understand what this entails at scale, we haven't begun to comprehend the magnitude or the difficulty of the problem we confront. So I would urge the council to reconsider both the budget for next year and the recommendations in the wildfire committee, which do not call for and have not addressed the longstanding call in the general plan safety element for town-wide evacuation drills. This has to be done at scale or we're never going to understand the magnitude of the problem we confront. Thank you.
Thank you, Rusty. Jeremy, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I wanted to say two things. I just wanted to clarify the record that Vice Chair Fow had located a, I think it was 2002 or 2003 academic study on how traffic patterns may flow. It was a mathematical formula. And I appreciated him bringing it up. He based his comments on that. It's clear that the town needs to understand further based on the number of people who may be in town at any one point and what could happen in evacuation, what that would look like if it's an immediate evacuation. I don't have any data to suggest one way or another what the issue may be between Zone Haven and data that the town has on traffic flow just from previous projects. We've done our own traffic counts. We have a good understanding of how traffic flows, particularly in busy parts of the morning and evening where there are a lot of cars that come in and out, and applying that to the Zone Haven tool will give us more information. It's also worth noting that while the town hasn't held a full evacuation drill in a few years, the Woodside Fire Protection District has attempted to do so. And I'm hopeful that if we do call for something again, we'll have much broader participation. The drills only tend to bring a few hundred people in, and it doesn't give you really any data to tell you how things are going to go. It does help as it relates to potential choke points in town, which I think we have some sense of where that might be already, but much more to come on that. So thank you. Thanks, Rusty.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other comments, I could entertain a motion on item 4. We're accepting the report and
I'd move acceptance of the report.
okay, moved by Craig, seconded by Mary Ann. Sharon, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Weingart,
Aye.
Councilmember Richards,
Aye.
Councilmember Hughes,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Derwin,
Aye.
Mayor Alves.
Aye.
Mr. Mayor, before we move to the next item, I just wanted to note that, as you know, I manage the meetings and the participants when they can, attendees when they can speak. It does appear that we're having some activity like we did last meeting. We've had Jeff Bezos join the meeting. I'm sure he's not listening to our meeting tonight, and a few others. So I am managing that as well. So just an expectation that we may get some activity.
Yeah, I saw some chats show up that were clearly not.
Yeah, Carrie Chin, who's a member of my staff, is not at the meeting tonight, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay, we will move on then to item 5, which is a report on the October 19th Law Enforcement Roundtable. Jeremy, starting? Oh, Kara?
So, yeah, so I'm sorry, just on the sort of bot issue. At this point, if we don't know whether it's, a legitimate person or not, we still should call on the person if they raise their hand. But obviously the content is probably coming from a bot.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. Okay, in that case, we'll move on to item 5. Jeremy, did you want to start on this one? You're muted.
Sorry. sorry about that. I'd like to turn it over to the subcommittee that worked so hard on the successful meeting last week, Mary Ann and John.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, John, do you want me to go?
Okay, I can start if you'd like me, Mary.
Okay, no, I can do it.
Okay.
Well, we felt really good about the event. It was a really lot of work, and it was an interesting exercise because I found the four people, Henrietta, the moderator, Michael Smith, Lori Owens, Kevin Allen, and those four. I did not know any of them. I had heard of Henrietta because I watched her show quite a few times, Talking with Henrietta. And I just found them through research and connections. So we had no idea how it would go. And we were really pleased with how they really got a conversation going amongst themselves. I think that was had to do with Henrietta. And they were so respectful of one another, even when it was clear they didn't agree. So that goal was reached. According to Carrie, we had about 112 attendees. After reviewing the list, a lot were from Portola Valley, but there were also quite a few from communities such as San Carlos, Millbrae, San Mateo, and County Unincorporated. According to Carrie, the Q&A function during the meeting was used 77 times, but not always for questions. And before the meeting, we had received quite a few questions too. So I estimate that we had maybe 75 or 80 questions, which is why we weren't able to get through all of them. Henrietta didn't even get through all the initial prepared questions. In an hour and a half, there's only so much you can do. A few takeaways from the event, which I think John and I both agreed upon, were communication, transparency, and cooperation really needed. We need more transparency in all aspects of policing. The sheriff's office needs to let the public know what they're doing, especially since many of their practices would actually make the public feel better. The sheriff's office needs to regularly engage with groups like the NAACP San Mateo chapter. The sheriff's office, the DA's office, the police departments, the private defender's office, and the community all just need to be in regular communication. So essentially, all the stakeholders need to come to the table and talk, which is what they did at our event. It was quite jarring to me that some of the panelists weren't even aware of a lot of the practices that Carlos was talking about. So the key takeaway is people need to talk more. And then another key takeaway for me was that implicit bias training is really important, needs to be ongoing. It's not a one and done. John, did you have any other takeaways?
Oh, I'll back up what you said. I think when we first started out, I thought of this as a learning opportunity for the community and for us on the council. And I think it was clear that it was a learning opportunity for everyone, including the panelists and on the Zoom. So I think the give and take between them was great and showed that there's a lot of room for more openness and transparency and back and forth, just like you said. It's and I think that was a couple of the panelists also pointed that out really succinctly. And Michael Smith wanted to talk about reimagining policing and making policing transparent to help create a trust between the people in uniform and the public. So yeah, I think it was fabulous, and obviously a lot more to be talked about. We only got in just scratched the surface, and we're hopefully be able to put together some more similar events in the near future to bring our local sheriffs that come into town so we can meet them. And that's something we can discuss. We can talk about maybe I don't know if we had that on the agenda. Go ahead.
Right. we had some next steps, and these are just some ideas. So the first one, as John just mentioned, was to do a Zoom, could be a coffee in the morning, could be an evening event with Christina and the deputies. That's specifically for the Portola Valley community, and to do this in November before the holidays. We have all the questions. There were some Portola Valley centric questions that could be asked and answered. Another idea is to once again try to get the reps from the 5 contract cities together, you know, a couple council members each maybe, or a manager and a council member, and settle on some important issues or questions, and then sit down with the sheriff to get a conversation going. And that goes to start thinking about what we might want to include in the conversation when the sheriff's contract comes up again. Also have the idea that maybe we want to reconvene the panel in a year to see if anything's changed. And then again, we had a lot of questions. It was really hard for us that the questions couldn't be answered. There just wasn't any time. So perhaps we could pull out the most significant ones, and a lot of them were on the same subject matter, and see if the sheriff or the DA would be willing to answer them either in a conversation or in writing. And now, do you all have some ideas?
Anne, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I've been having some connectivity issues. First of all, thank you to Marianne and John for all your fabulous work on all of these issues. I certainly, as a starting point, Marianne, thought your first idea, which was to convene a panel with our local deputies, would probably be very valuable, and obviously probably the easiest to put together quickly, and potentially before the holiday period starts. So I would certainly endorse that as the best next step, just because I think it's pretty tangible, and it should be, you know, relatively easy. And I say that knowing how much work you both have to do to get this together, but you know, that would be my certainly suggestion. And again, thank you for having created, I think, a terrific panel and discussion, and obviously getting a lot of people engaged very heavily in the topics.
Yeah. Craig, did you want to say anything, or?
No, I think that the panel with some local deputies sounds like a good idea. I think getting to know, you know, the actual folks who are out there on our streets is good. I think the panel discussion was great, but you know, by design it was focused to some degree on Portola Valley issues, but to some degree on kind of county-wide issues and even broader national issues, which was appropriate. But I think focusing on Portola Valley and the folks who are actually doing the work on the ground here would be a useful follow-up.
Yeah, I agree. We've had a few events, kind of just little local, like we had one down the hill for me on Portola Road with the deputies 2 years ago now, where we just had a little like donuts and coffee out one morning, and a lot of parents walking kids to school were there, and it was a great, just several deputies and a lot of parents coming by, and it was, the more contact between our deputies and the community, the better, in my opinion. The one specific is we've talked about trying to get more information on kind of the number of traffic stops, and just like sort of documentation of all the interactions between the deputies and just residents in our territory. And I was just been curious, that was just one sort of transparency question we had going forward. Who's getting pulled over for what reasons, and what are the resolution of those things. It seems like a straightforward thing to ask. It doesn't really come up specifically in the forum, but I thought it was something to sort of continue talking to the sheriff's office about.
That came up a lot in the questions, but we didn't get to it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. If there's no other comments, so we've got some hands up. Nora Barendsen, go ahead.
Does Jeff Alps sleep by himself?
Okay. Eric Zhao has his hand up.
Jeff, you have a pretty face. You look like Anderson Cooper.
I get that a lot. Okay, David Cardinal's a real person, I think. Go ahead, David.
I think I'm unmuted. You do look like Anderson Cooper.
I get that a lot.
First of all, thanks so much for the roundtable. I thought it was really valuable. To echo what Jeff and Craig said, I think it was mostly focused on how to police communities of color. And we have a very different problem, which is how do you police communities not of color, where we have certain things that have happened here and certain profiles for people who might have done this or that. And it'd be great to get the stats, but I'd really like to hear the stories behind that. So if you're a detective here and you've got these leads and these crimes, how do you go about figuring out who to stop and why, and how does that work? Not just, how many people did you pull over with a taillight out or whatever. So I'd love to see some of these follow-up ideas that are more local to Portola Valley.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Actually, that would be an interesting question of, we talk about deputies, but then it'd be interesting to meet some of the detectives. I've never met any of the actual detectives from the sheriff's office who investigate some of our crimes at the higher level. It'd be interesting to talk to them sometime too. Good thought. Marianne, go ahead.
We could see if they could include a detective.
Yeah.
in his- Right, John? We can ask Christina.
And through the chair, we did have a coffee, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, that did include 15 or 16 staff members from the sheriff's office that had a couple detectives. So they're very willing to do that. I think Sheriff Bolanos was there too at that one.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to share, and I'm sure Marianne and John may have more comments about this. One of the things that's somewhat unique to our community is that we contract with the sheriff's office. So the sheriff deputies and those who support the deputies, detectives, and otherwise do work in other communities where there have been some of the higher profile incidences. So my understanding from when Marianne and John were putting this together was that it was, something to explore, certainly, that if there are issues that are happening other places, we should also ensure that they may not happen here. I don't know if you wanted to share anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, we are clearly dealing with a region-wide police force, and it was kind of obvious, necessary to talk about it in the regional context, since we share them with several other cities and a large part of the county. I think they serve 700 some thousand people. So, and that's how they see their job, and it helps for us to see it as they see it, I think. So, yeah, it's definitely a matter of that was how I saw it, as an initial task to learn about the sheriff's office and then bring it back. I'm expecting a call from Captain Corpus, and we intend to set up a meeting with the town, coffee that Marianne mentioned, and hopefully be able to get a little more focus to the town-centric idea of how they operate. So.
Marianne, go ahead.
Oh, so do you think that our Zoom with local people should be a coffee in the morning or an evening event?
Anne, go ahead.
I think morning. I think increasingly we're seeing meetings shift out of evening and venues just because people's availability is much greater during the daytime hours. So I think it's always a great idea if you can to get people involved in the morning.
Okay.
Yeah, everyone's home all the time now, so it's not as big a deal to have a meeting in the middle of the day. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Okay. Rusty's got his hand up. Rusty, go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff. I just have one observation, and that is, I think it's terrific that you're pulling this together, and congratulations on the first panel. It was excellent. But as we go forward, I would caution you against what I sense as a propensity to zero in on policing in Portola Valley. The origin of this interest, remember, stemmed from the killing of George Floyd and the disparity of policing that our society confronts. And so I would urge you, if you are thinking of bringing in not only street officers, but detectives to look at policing, you think about it in the context of what's the disparity in policing between South San Francisco, East Palo Alto, and Portola Valley when it comes to domestic abuse, when it comes to drug offenses, when it comes to DUIs, when it comes to sex abuse, and not allow yourself to zero in on what's going on in Portola Valley, but rather look at the disparity in policing and make sure we understand, are we comfortably sitting here benefiting from a very disparate treatment from what the rest of our citizens in this county receive if they have a different color skin or a different ethnic background or different economic circumstances? Thank you.
Yep, point well taken. Thank you. Okay. If there are no other questions or comments, I believe we're just moving on from this one. So again, Mary Ann, John, thank you. That was a great forum. A lot more interesting conversations to happen going forward, and kind of looking forward to hearing them. So thank you. Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to item 6, an update on the green building ordinance and our next steps. Is Laura going to do this one?
That would be me. Now, it would
Go ahead, Jeremy.
normally be Brandy, but Brandy was taken ill earlier today, so I am going to be covering for her. So as you recall, earlier this year, prior to COVID, if you can remember that, the council did hold a study session and provided some direction as related to an update on the green building ordinance. Given that it had been some time, we thought it was important to come back and ensure that we had captured everything that the council was looking to do. One area that has obviously potentially impacted some of the thinking here is the fires recently. So there may be some shift in thinking as it relates to the direction. What we captured on red page 28 and 29 is our understanding of the direction. And we included the documentation that we provided on February 12th, February 12th, including the staff report and other associated documents. Laura is here to answer any specific questions you might have as it relates to her department and the function that she provides the town. But really, we just wanted to make sure that we captured this correctly and if there's been any shift in thinking. Thank you.
Okay, if anyone from the council wants to just weigh in on the memo and just confirming or clarifying the staff's interpretation. Anyone want to start on that one? Well, I'll start. I think you've got...
John had his hand up, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, John, I didn't see you.
No problem.
Go ahead.
So, no, I had a question. I recall the discussion on red page 29, the discussion about requiring EV-ready parking for ADUs. And it makes me nervous to see if convenient at the discretion of the building official for that item. I know we sort of went around and around about how we could approach that, but I would like to see some other metrics to deciding when that's possible and when it's not. I think that ends up never happening, probably.
Yeah, there's a lot of latitude there, I agree, yeah.
The other one is pre-wiring for battery backup. It may be not a real issue at this point. In the past, the battery backups were so varied and so many variations in size of wiring required and types of enclosures required that it would be really difficult to do it ahead of time. It may be a little simpler now as things like the power wall, but I think that might present some issues.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm seeing now with CalGrain is that basically the requirement now is that there's a conduit going from the main electrical panel to the rooftop for solar. I think, as long as that conduit is accessible for batteries, along with the solar, the solar developers want the battery close to the solar array. So I think, you know, the point where when you've got a conduit, as code already calls for, a conduit going from the panel to the roof, it probably gives you a decent launch point for a battery if you're going to install one.
Well, it depends. Usually the battery runs off of the
panel.
and that's usually in a totally different spot. Probably has to be outdoors as well. So there's some.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, I just installed a large battery system, and it was very simple to do. They installed it right near they wanted to install it near the panel, actually, rather than near the source of power, because then you get less impedance in your line. So when the mains goes out, the batteries kick in, and you don't get a voltage fluctuation. But I had nothing pre-wired, and it was extremely simple to just take the panel out and add the wiring that they needed. The pre-wiring, I don't think, would have saved me. I don't even know what pre-wiring I would have put in, frankly. They just open the panel up and add an extra circuit in there and add the battery in. So I'm not sure that any pre-wiring would necessarily be helpful. If anything, you might just spend a bunch on pre-wiring, and then whatever battery system you do end up putting in needs different wiring than whatever you'd pre-wired. So
the simpler the better, I agree. Yeah. I guess I will say, just going back to kind of the overall, I mean, I think in terms of kind of our overall direction from February is that we did agree to sort of all electric with no exceptions. We did agree with, I think most of what we wanted to see going forward was pretty well summarized here. Does anyone want to clarify or reconsider this? I mean, for my part, having seen more projects in the last 6-8 months since we discussed this, you know, all electric has become a lot. I mean, it's almost the standard at this point. I'm pretty sure that by the next code cycle in 2023 or the 2022 code, it pretty much will be the standard for all new residential construction. In terms of fire safety, well done electric wiring is actually much safer than having gas connections. You know, modern gas appliances will not work without electricity. So the idea that electrical failures, you're going to be relying on your gas appliances and electrical failure is simply not correct. I feel better about this. I mean, I'll admit, in February, I was sort of pleasantly surprised that we came to this point, but I feel better about it than I did back then. So if anyone wants to discuss that, I'm willing to. I just wanted to point out that I think we're moving in the right direction here. John.
Yeah, I'll just weigh in on the page 20, on 28, the summary of the 4 points. I agree those were what we agreed on, and I think they still are valid approaches.
Okay, we have one hand up. David, go ahead.
Great, thanks. First of all, now that there's induction cooktops, I'm all for all electric. The one concern I have with battery is, as Jeff knows, for 2 years ago, we upgraded our solar to a much larger array. And it's very difficult to find somebody to add an aftermarket battery to that array. So if the town could help support, we're all wired, we've got the inverter, the auto transformer, we just need somebody to put the battery in, but most of the solar guys don't want to handle that business. So that's something to think about going forward if we can facilitate that.
Yeah. And I in the long run, I know that the goal of the PCE RA backup battery program is to extend it so that it does apply to retrofits like yours, but it's not there yet. So yeah, point well taken. Yeah. If there's no other comment on this one, Laura, go ahead.
Just a clarifying question for when Brandy and I go to work on the code language. For the all electric with no exceptions, does that include outdoor grills and landscape features would not be allowed to have gas either?
I assumed yes. I mean, with the understanding that if somebody wants to, you know, put a propane tank under their barbecue or in their fire pit, they can do that. But that we would basically sort of not allow sort of a dedicated natural gas hookup. that's a question. Does anyone disagree with that or? Okay, I think that's where we are then.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions, then are we, sorry, this is not, we're not an action item, correct? Is that, this is just an update?
Correct. Yeah, this was just a check-in.
Okay. Thank you all. Then we'll move on to item 7, which is council liaison reports. Mary Ann, you go first. Well, I was always calling on Ann first, so I thought I'd switch things up a little bit.
Well, they're going to be sorry because I have 1, 2, wait, not that one, 3, 4. Okay, there was a CCAG meeting on October 15th. There was a formal presentation to State Senator Jerry Hill. As you know, he's termed out. And since he's been around for such a long time, it was very heartfelt. I first met him when I went onto the library JPA board, which was maybe 2006. And he was on that board. He was on the Board of Supervisors. Before that, he was a city council member in San Mateo. So that was really nice. Then there was a presentation on the regional monitoring program in the San Francisco Estuary Institute about clean water and resilient landscapes. And then there was a presentation on an update on RENA 6 by Josh Abrams from 21 Elements. And I sent you all the slides from that. Did you get them? Okay, good. So, I mean, I'm sure you've read about this. You know that the methodology committee met many times, and this was a regional body. It was composed of the 9 Bay Area counties, and they recommended option 8A, and then that was approved in a very long ABAG meeting. And as it turned out, I can't remember which counties. It's Contra Costa and another one. We're trying to shove more of their housing on the South Bay, including San Mateo County and Santa Clara County. And we were able to fend that off. So we didn't get more housing. And as you all know, the numbers are extraordinarily high in that, excuse me, in that slide packet I sent to you. And by the way, to members of the public, this is available on the CCAG website, ccag.ca.gov. Go under the board tab and then the agenda tab. The agenda for 10:15 has the slideshow. Anyway, there was a chart that showed how many what everybody's RENA number is now and what it was before and the percentage increase. And ours is very high, but there are so many that are very high, and people were basically just throwing up their hands and saying, this is impossible, we can't do this. And I don't know what to tell you. It is what it is. We will, I guess there's still a few more meetings before it becomes set in stone. That will happen next year. But I think that my personal opinion is I don't think we're going to get a break, because if you want to argue wildfire, 55% of PG&E's territory is in high wildfire areas. So whatever happened here would have to happen in many other places, and you can't tell a great deal of the state that you can't build. The methodology committee was very adamant about building housing in high opportunity areas. Those are defined as having access to good schools, safety, a nice environment, clean air, and also putting housing in areas that have historically not built a lot of affordable housing and are not economically or racially diverse. The idea is that for years we've been putting housing in the same places. If you know Cecilia Taylor, who is the mayor of Menlo Park, and she lives in Bellhaven, she has been complaining for so long, why do you keep putting all the housing in our neighborhood? You know, why are you putting all the housing in East Palo Alto? Why are you putting all the housing in South San Francisco and Daly City? So they're saying now, why don't we put some housing in Woodside, Hillsborough, Atherton, Portola Valley? And by the way, check out Hillsborough's numbers. They're way worse than ours. So that's where that is right now. Let's see what else. Oh, there was a presentation on the Transportation Fund for Clean Air, $4 surcharge fee on vehicle reg. And I always look at these thinking, can we apply? Well, it wasn't applicable to us and we didn't apply, but they did receive some proposals and they did end up funding 5 projects in South City, Half Moon Bay, Daly City, Belmont, and Millbrae. The ledge report, again, this was 10/15. It's always old news. The 2 bills that we supported were signed by the governor. That was 1044 that phases out the firefighting foam, and AB 841 Ting's bill about school ventilation grant program. There were about 450 bills that went to the governor. That is substantially lower than a regular year where there are 1,200 to 1,300. Let's see. The legislators will come back December 7. They will swear in their new members. They will go over the rules. Bills can be reintroduced. Then everyone goes back to their districts and comes back in early January. They have spent a lot of time looking at bills in the housing transportation sector. And looking ahead, housing will be back in full force. Some of the CEQA transportation bills will be back. The bond conversations will continue. Pandemic recovery response of some sort will be a major discussion. Our lobbyist predicts when they do come back, it will look like it did in the final months, which was social distancing, Zoom meetings. Oh, also wildfire recovery and response will be a big ticket item and fairly urgent. Then there was a program on the stormwater program, Matt Fabry's green infrastructure, which is always a delight to watch. And now there are rebates, a $300 rebate for rain gardens. And I will get that information so that we can put it out on our platform so people can apply if they want to put in a rain garden. Okay. Our express lane meeting was solely a presentation on the overview of the toll ordinance. So that is the toll and the toll collection process, the penalties, et cetera. And we have to remember that Caltrans has statutory authority and we have to coordinate with Caltrans. So we enforce the tolls and the policies all need to be integrated across the different roadways, such as on our side of the bay, you want to have roughly the same policies as you have down in Santa Clara County so that people aren't driving and suddenly everything changes. And the policies also have to be integrated with an equity program, which we will one day have. Right now, motorcycles, CHP polices, and ER vehicles are exempt. HOV 2+ and HOV 3+ and clean air with a valid DMV decal get discounts, and then potential equity program discounts. There's 2 kinds of violations. A toll violation is when you don't have a fast track responder and that you get in the mail. An HOV violation. So if you're trying to, drive in an HOV lane with like 2 dummies in the back seat, that is the CHP officer pulling you over for a moving violation. So there were a lot of questions. There were a lot of questions like, how do people get transponders? What about people who don't have bank accounts? How do they get transponders? Is there going to be a hard cap on how much money you could pay per corridor through a whole corridor? Some have hard caps, but if you don't have hard caps, then you get more cars moving. Public express buses get to go in the express lanes. Do private express buses? Will CHP increase their staffing? anyway, there were so many questions that it was clear that this board wants to have more input into policy. So they're going to bring it back for a study session. The RMCP Resource Management Climate Protection Committee had a very full agenda. There was a presentation on the breadth of the current BayREN programs offered in the county. There was a presentation on PG&E proposed community microgrid program to the CPUC, update on electrical vehicle ownership and charging infrastructure growth in the Bay Area, and a presentation on the results of the PCE survey on perceptions of PCE and EV ownership. The BayREN programs, I was really surprised to see there are a lot of, energy rebatey kind of programs for residential, multifamily, commercial. And I think what I'm going to do is get all this to the Sustainability Committee and have them vet it to see what we might be able to advertise to our community. The PG&E's community microgrids was really interesting. Jeff, were you able to sit in on that part of the meeting?
Part of it, I had to leave partway through it.
Okay, so let me get to it. Apparently in January of this year, a new program was proposed to the CPUC called Community Microgrids. And these would be for hospitals, fire, police, gas stations, markets, town centers. And they approved it with a few modifications in June. And then there was some sort of a thing filed in August, and we are waiting for the resolution. If it's approved, and I think it will be rolled down in 2021. So to be eligible, you could be a tier 2-3 high fire threat district, or you could have prior PSPS impacts, or you could be prone to outages, and your customers served have to be at least one critical facility and an additional customer. So I believe we could qualify. The project's not to exceed 20 MW. Did I write that correctly?
Yeah, megawatts, yes.
In aggregate, okay. And you also have to demonstrate support from your local government, tribe, or CCNA. So I think it sounds like we might be able to apply. A lot of the other categories are for the disadvantaged and vulnerable communities. Let's see what else. And examples would be equipment to enable a section of the grid to disconnect from the larger grid or operate the microgrid, things like this. And
it sounded to me like PG&E was willing to put up money for kind of stuff on their side of the meter to enable people to do. So, I mean, it sounded to me from what I recall that we were going to have to still kind of install the equipment and make whatever changes we had to make on our side of the meter, but PG&E would help with anything on their side, like connecting town center to other properties, which is a big deal. But
yeah, well, I guess, yeah, you should talk to Bill Chang.
Yeah, I will. I'm remembering what I caught from that description. It's for us, it's less of a big deal to some other communities.
Yeah.
The big thing here is that PG&E is now sort of actively participating in connecting different meters to each other, which used to just be this bright line they would never let anybody cross except under very extenuating circumstances. And now they're actually saying, okay, if you've got three separate buildings under different meters and you want to connect them for resilience, you can do that.
Yeah.
So the question would be, how would we take advantage of that part of it? But it's a really, it was a good presentation.
I think it merits.
Oh yeah, we gotta look into it more.
Yeah. Okay, then there was an item on EV ownership and charging infrastructure. As you all know, there's quite the goal to go to all electric vehicles. For example, in 2019, 3.4% of cars are EVs. By 2050, they want it to be 90%. So there's a lot of room for improvement. We have in the Bay Area about 9,500 public charging ports, and we need 25,000. So it was a lot of discussion about how we get there. Oh, I thought this was interesting. The Air District has, I'm not drunk. I really feel like I'm slurring. I am really having trouble talking because of my cold. Okay, the Air District EV grant program. Apparently you can, if you're willing to just say, no more car, I'm gonna scrap my car, you can get up to $9,500 if you replace with an e-bike or take public transportation. Had anyone heard of this? I mean, they're not going to do it in Portola Valley, but I thought it was kind of quite an amazing thing. Okay. Oh, and there was a lot of talk from the people, from the electeds, not the public members, about how, there's this push to change and make your fleet all electric, but there aren't a lot of heavy duty vehicles that are electric yet. So like we have to buy a new truck. I don't think, is there an electric truck even out there? And if there is, it's kind of expensive, right?
Yeah, the newest electric trucks are still out of our reach. That's why we were holding out a little bit.
They're still kind of cutting edge, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the results of the PCE survey, I don't think I need to go into that. And then what you've all been waiting for is the Planning Commission meeting of October 21. This was the appeal of the ASCC decision to approve the architectural review and site development permit to construct a new residence at 138 Goya. So the neighbor at 148 Goya, who owns the house but does not live there, appealed the decision. It was a long meeting. It was a very difficult meeting, and Judith must be commended for handling it masterfully. It was amazing. Cara was there, she knows. I don't even know where to begin. Rather than go through every single detail, what happened was that two of the commissioners felt that they probably could uphold the decision at the ASCC, and two felt like they would like to give a little more time and have another meeting. The neighbors are not friendly to one another. This is not a happy situation. It was very disturbing to the commissioners to see the acrimony. I saw it as both neighbors have their dream. 148 bought the property, and he bought the property for the view because he could sit up in his house. It hasn't been built yet, by the way. There is a house, but he wants a new house. And he could look out and he could go over and see the East Bay where he used to be. And then he could go see Stanford where he ended up. And he could just look out on his life as he lived out his last days on this property with his family. The family would come back and live with him. 138 had the dream of building this house in Portola Valley, Aruna, with her husband. This was their dream. And it was also to honor their son who died 5 years ago. And in the process, her husband died. And she wants to realize his dream. So both have dreams. The point that is the tough one is the view. The appellant feels that he is entitled to his view. And with the design of the new house, he is losing part of his view, not all of it, but part of it. And then there was a lot of discussion that the process was not followed correctly. And there was discussion that that people weren't willing to be flexible in working with each other. And it became kind of a he said, she said, although there were a few documents read into the record that kind of swayed the commissioners to go towards upholding the ASCC decision. There was also a lot of talk about WASC. WASC had weighed in on this, and I'm not going to get into this because I have a view on the current state of WASC, but that should be addressed before it comes to us if they appeal. So in the end, they decided to uphold the ASCC decision. It was unanimous, but actually it was 4 because one member was not there. but they weren't happy about it because it was not a good situation. It was a very awkward, actually ugly situation. And that is that.
Okay. Thank you, Marianne. John, go next, please.
Okay, let's see. I went to the Stronger Together Housing Leadership Council meeting. Panelists Evelyn Stivers from Housing Leadership Council, Lisa Gautier from East Palo Alto, and Zoe Siegel from Greenbelt Alliance, talking about housing and the environment, preserving the environment, and working to lessen the impacts on global climate change. And there was a lot of the discussion centered around the parts of the county that are down by the bay, and so there was a lot of talk about work on new ecotone levies and that sort of thing. There was they noted that in East Palo Alto, at least, they had a lot of help from community groups that came in and helped support their work in figuring out how to approach new housing, fairly dense housing. There was a few references to building in fire-prone areas, but it didn't get very involved while I was there. I only managed to stay through the main part of the meeting and didn't manage to stay around for the breakout sessions, which may have addressed that some more. Interesting conversation, but a little bit difficult to develop take homes for Portola Valley situation. The next meeting was on the ASCC, and this sort of harkens back to Marianne's comments on her Planning Commission meeting. First item on the agenda was a home over by the 846 Portola Road behind the Hallett store. Rather unusual site, being in the AP zone, so it doesn't have quite the same rules as most of the residential lots in town. They managed to really shoehorn in quite a bit of space in a very small lot. And that was approved unanimously. There was a little discussion about fencing, some pro and some con, fencing in this little lots between the lots that will potentially have the impact of making it seem like it's more cut up than it even is. That has not been resolved yet. Let's see, the main part of the discussion though came later, and it had to do with the ASCC talking about potentially, well, it was centered around a lot of Dana Breen's comments over the past several months, and her somewhat dissatisfaction with the way ASCC works at the moment. And it looks like it's going to result in some additional conversations. I'm sure Jeremy is looking forward to coming back and working on that from vacation. But I think it was actually all in all a fairly positive thing to have discussed in the venue that they discussed it at. There was a lot of back and forth between all the members of the ASCC who were there. There were just 4 of them. Some pushback against the idea of doing anything different, but some, I think, interesting ideas about how some of these things might be addressed. And the reason it harked back to Marianne's topic was that there was some feeling that ASCC used to be able to meet earlier and attack things earlier and possibly avoid some of the neighbor-to-neighbor friction by addressing issues earlier in the process, so that people haven't already got the things so settled that they get to a point where they really can't financially afford to change things. whether or not we can actually do that is up in the air, and it'll take some adjustment if we want to go that route. So that will be interesting to watch. The other thing that occurred to me as we were in that meeting was that as a liaison, I think it would be helpful if liaisons to ASCC and Planning Commission had the connection as a panelist rather than as having to raise your hand and not, I mean, it's awkward to try to participate at all. So it would really be helpful if we were involved as panelists, I think. And let's see, there was some public comment on that meeting. Some folks on Westridge actually brought up the same issues, said that their experience was that it would have been helpful to have been involved later, had the ASCC involved later to avoid the friction between neighbors. Again, that came up several times. Okay, let's see. Next one was a Conservation Committee meeting, and that one I mentioned earlier. We talked about a fire safe plant list. That will be addressed in a couple of weeks at a special meeting, it looks like. And that took up a fair amount of the meeting. And then there was talk about right-of-way issues. This is one that Howard will get to think about. The issue of when the staff goes out and cuts down things like in the right-of-way, like eucalyptus trees and acacias that tend to sprout back up really fast. And then they don't get back to them very soon. They tend to sprout back up even more vigorously than they were before, and they get even harder to take out. So they were wondering if there's a way they could track those and even make it so that the Conservation Committee members could help track them and keep on top of them so they don't take a full day to keep them down. If you hit those things consistently, they end up being really easy to take care of and eventually they die out. But if you cut them down and then leave them for a couple of years, they end up being worse than they were in the first place. So, and that's also another fire issue. So I think there are examples of that at the corner of Westridge and Portola Road where there were some eucalyptus that were cut down and they sprouted back up really, really happily. And will take quite a bit of effort to take them back out. So that's something I think maybe we can use PV Connect to record the locations and have those come back up more automatically or something. Anyway, something to look at. And I think that was it.
Okay, thanks, John. Craig, go ahead.
Sure, I just had one very quickly. I had a meeting with Carrie and Brandy and our development team for the new website, or the project manager thereof, who showed us kind of the working prototype that they had up and running in a variety of different color schemes. And we went through and looked at colors, and we shared those with Anne as well. She wasn't able to make the meeting, but I think we have settled on a color scheme, which is good. We all were fairly much in agreement on that. And so I believe they are now in the process of copying all the content over from the current website and getting everything kind of up and running. It just had some placeholder content and some of the stuff filled in when we looked at it. I believe in the next couple weeks should be ready for review and potential approval and go live. So not too much longer until we have a new updated website.
Great, thank you. Anne, go ahead.
Well, as Craig said, I was sorry to miss the meeting, but it is going to be exciting. It's going to look great. It's a much needed update to I think our website functionality as well. So a lot more feature sets too. The only other meeting I had was the county BPAC meeting, and it was actually a pretty robust meeting from the standpoint of there was a big discussion of the updated and very significant BPAC countywide plan that has been in development for the last year or so. And what's kind of at the heart of some of the discussion that we were having has been really the biggest goals in that plan amongst them were the north-south connectivity and east-west. And that would be both countywide as much as possible, and then within individual communities. So much of the focus, we didn't qualify because of our network, et cetera, that we're really not part of that at all. However, that said, it's a fascinating and very, very regional approach to how they're developing this over time. What was not clear, however, was what the impact of COVID on this is going to be. As the hubs have changed, as the transportation has changed, as there's uncertainty about Caltrans, I think that there's a likelihood, or we'll see how it all plays out through COVID, but clearly that it's still subject, even though there's been an awful lot of money and time invested in this plan. My instincts and all this, some of the discussion we were having says that there will be some more changes as things reemerge in whatever form they're going to reemerge in a longer term basis. And that came to the second point and second major discussion at the meeting, which was the status update on the last round of community grants that had been given 2 years ago, now 2 years ago. And each community that had been awarded a grant was reporting their Howard Youngs were in the meetings reporting on the projects within their communities. And almost to a community, there were either less funding available as a result of COVID coming from the community, which had slowed them down, and or delays in the process just related to the lower priority within their own municipalities vis-a-vis COVID. And the fact that they weren't going to be able to move forward, it was way down on their priority lists. And now they were looking at 1 to 2 year longer delays. I mean, it was significant. And Redwood City had 2 projects, both one in the capital and one in planning. The planning one, they're even going to start that exercise for another 18 months, probably at best, just given staffing constraints. And so you had a variety of issues that were impacting all of the municipalities that were doing it. So I think it's going to result in, just a slowdown. I think the monies will be available, but I think the period will be lengthened in which communities will be able to actually get their projects. Even if they're awarded those dollars, they'll be extended the time period in which they're generally required to expend them. And then potentially even in the next round of awards, a longer time period for them to actually move forward and spend those monies. So it was a very interesting meeting, just because it had a lot to do with how the impacts are already being felt throughout the county. And that was it.
Okay, thank you. I didn't have any town meetings. Last Thursday, the PCE board met. Nothing too significant. PCE now has several programs out there if people can take advantage of. The battery, a solar plus battery from Sunrun. We actually now have an EV. We have an e-bike program that we're now pushing forward on, rebates for electric bikes. EV programs, both new EVs under $45,000 and used EVs in disadvantaged communities. And then one more. Heat pump water heaters. So we're working with Barendsen, as Marianne mentioned before, to subsidize conversions to heat pump water heaters. Just another all sort of relatively new emerging technologies that we're trying to spur the adoption of. That's the only thing I had. So in that case, we can move on to the town manager's report. Jeremy, go ahead.
Thank you. My report is fairly limited, but just a few items looking back. First, the playgrounds are open at Town Center, which we're delighted about, and they are being used. So we're glad to see everybody out, and they appear to be being used under the guidance that's been provided by the state. So we appreciate that. We continue to have success at the all sports court on tennis and pickleball. There hasn't been as much activity pickleball related as we first anticipated in the pickleballers thought. So we're doing some minor amendments there. The new guidance from the state moving that we've moved into orange looks like it allows skate parks. So we've got to look at that to see if we can accommodate that based on the configuration of the all sports court. So that's upcoming. That's really my report. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. In that case, we can move on to, are we on digests? Okay. Digest from the 15th. Any comments on October 15th digest? Okay. The 22nd, any comments on that one? Okay. If that's the case, then I think we're all done. Oh, Marianne, go ahead.
I have a request that we adjourn the meeting in the memory of Ann Wingert's mama.
Oh, yes. Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, Ann.
Thank you.
What was her name, Ann?
Nancy Nicholas Wengert.
I think that's a fine gesture. Yes. Sorry, Ann. And with that, I believe we will adjourn in Nancy's memory. Thank you all. Good night.
Good night. Thanks.